Welcome to episode 9 of This Spiritual Fix. Today we're going to be talking about the culture of spirituality and how the changing world can sometimes change you and your practices. We're going to be talking about the new age versus the now age and how those different things can really affect the way that we see our spiritual lives. Stay tuned.
Hypnosis, mindfulness, meditation, past life regression, RTT, spirituality.
This Spiritual Fix. 2 mystical mamas hacking the self-help game.
With Anna Stromquist and Kristina Wiltsey.
Hello. Hi, Anna. Welcome to The Spiritual Fix.
Hello. How are you, Kristina?
I'm good. How is everybody out there?
How's everybody?
Check in. How are you doing? Take a deep breath. Maybe longer than that. So what's going on, Anna?
Nothing. I wanted to share with you an interesting thing that happened.
Yeah.
So as you know, I love to do past life regressions. So it started when I was about 16. My high school friend and I got really interested in Brian Weiss, and he wrote Many Lives, Many Masters, and he's a PhD psychologist, and he basically used hypnosis and accidentally found that like during hypnotic sessions, people could go back and remember past lives. Now that's an episode for another day. If you want to argue whether past lives are real or not, I believe they are real. I've had plenty of experiences to test to me that they're real. And I've read plenty of accounts of people saying that they're real. It's been how many? I can't do the math. 25 years I've been giving myself and friends past life regressions with wonderful, amazing results. So earlier this week, I gave myself a past life regression, and my question was, because I wanted to understand something about my relationship with my daughter. You know, I just put the intention out there that I wanted to go back and see a past life memory where my daughter and I were together, if there was one. So I go back and I see this memory of me that I am on the back of a black horse and I'm hugging a soldier, you know, hugging around his waist, and he's riding. And my sense was, there had been a big, either like a civil war or a war or a village had been invaded or something, but something traumatic had happened and I was all alone. I had lost my family, and this soldier scooped me up, put me on the back of his horse, and took me to a neighboring village where he dropped me off at a widow's home who ended up raising me. And my now daughter was also an orphan that was raised by this woman. So that's where we met. In this memory, it was like I must have been speaking Gaelic, or maybe I was a Druid. I'm not quite sure what my background was, but I know he took me to this neighboring village where they spoke a different language, and I was a sudden orphan. So there was that memory, and I went into to understand stuff about me and my daughter. Then later on that day, my son says, out of the blue, keep in mind, I did not tell anyone about this regression. My son says, Mommy, in a past life, our dog was a black horse and I was a soldier. Like, he just said it out of the blue. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, in the memory, I had no recollection of knowing the horse or the soldier. And I said, Axel, what did you say? He's like, yeah, Mommy, Iman used to be a horse. He was a black horse and he was mine and I was a soldier. And I'm like, what in the world? And I was like, just test him, you know, because kids are so filter free, you know, they don't have the filter that we do.
Right.
I was just like, so was I in that life? He goes, yeah, Mom, you were there. And I'm like, who was I? He's like, you were a little girl. I go, how old was I? He goes, you were 4. And it was just like, what? The soldier, the black horse, and the little girl.
Wow.
It was like, what are the freaking odds?
What are the odds of that?
So
That's
of course
insane.
the hair on my back like stood up, you know, like I'm just like, oh my gosh. So my son saved me in a past life
and took you to your daughter.
and took me to my daughter.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That is so cool. I love it. I can't wait for your past life regression episode. I'm really excited about that. Cool. So today we are going to be talking about the now versus the new age. And the reason that I want to talk about this is because, for context, the new age is like what started in the 70s with like
Louise Hay, right?
Well, she wasn't the start of it, but that was like one of the many things, right? It was like it was a cultural revolution, so it becomes a spiritual revolution as well, right? I kind of, like I said, I have this theory that like wave of feminism usually precedes the wave of feminine usually precedes, cultural revolution, which then like has a spiritual revolution and stuff like that along with it. So the now age is what we consider to be now, right? So some people say it's we're now in the age of awakening and we were in the age of faith. But the reason that I want to bring it up is because I feel like there's been a lot of flack on the new age, like a lot of flack. You'll hear stuff like toxic positivity, fear mongering. There's like all sorts of stuff.
They'll make fun of it.
Yeah. People make fun. I mean, people have always made fun of the new age. There's no doubt about that because people are like, oh, I'm going to be airy fairy and I'm just going to do whatever. But like, there was a lot of good things that happened in the new age and then that evolves. And I think that everybody has a tendency to just like poo-poo their parents' like experience, religious or spiritual, which is probably some of what we're seeing right now. But I also think it's really interesting to like point out both of them and kind of see where we've evolved in terms of like our mass understanding of spirituality. Because I think 1 in 5 people in this country now are non-denominational spiritual. Like they're non-denominational, like they're not doing anything other than I am just spiritual. So that's a lot of people.
How many are atheists? Do you know?
I don't. But I think it's a pretty small percentage.
Yeah.
In the whole thing. I think that there's a lot of agnostic, and I think agnostic falls under non-denominational spiritual. Like I just don't really know, but I'm not religious, right? And so that's what we're seeing so much is that, back in the New Age, people were rejecting Catholicism as it was back then, or they're rejecting like whatever religious things they had. And now their kids are going a step further and saying, I am actually very spiritual, but I'm not the spiritual that, my parents had to get taught and had to break away from, or some of the people did. So yeah, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Some people say that the New Age started in 1970. Other people say it starts in 1980, but almost all of them agree that the New Age stopped on December 20th, 2012, which is really interesting.
Why?
I think it had to do with like the mind.
12.
Yeah, well, it's 12, 21, 12, like all, because there was like all the Mayan calendar stuff. Everyone thought the end of the world was going to happen in 2012, but it was just like came in, ushering in a new era. It's interesting too, because the now age, the term the now age, I always think of it as the power of now, like Eckhart Tolle's book that came out in 1997 and then took obviously a while to kind of seep into the mainstream culture. But like the now age also, it indicates like social media and like I'm going to be looking on social media and I'm going to be doing this kind of stuff because everything is available now. Like you don't have to wait for information. You can just go find it right now. So there's a parallel in the rise of technology with the rise of this new age of spirituality. Okay. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about first the new age and kind of what were the hallmark things about the new age and what were kind of the cons of the new age, right? Because it's really, I think it's really important to recognize.
New age being like Hay House Publishing Company.
Yep.
Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay. Trying to think of the Marianne Williamson. Or is she more?
Well, because she's lasted. I mean, a lot of these people have lasted. I would say like Eckhart Tolle, Marianne Williamson
are more now.
A Course in Miracles, like the original Course in Miracles people were in the New Age because that was like totally came out in the 70s, but that's obviously like evolving. And Marianne Williamson is obviously a teacher of the Course in Miracles. And then also, I would say Abraham Hicks and all these Lazarus, like all the people who got channeled back in the day are all the New Age people. And the Now Age people are... it's a little bit of mix of consumerism. I'm not going to lie. It's a lot of manifesting. It's like, how can I manifest my desires? How can I manifest stuff? But what I think is interesting and what I'll get into is how like manifesting was versus how manifesting is, and like how dark practices were largely kind of ignored sometimes in the New Age, but now they're like very much a part of the Now Age.
Okay.
So the first thing is that the reason that the New Age was called the New Age was it had to do with the age of Aquarius, right? And so for those of you guys who don't know about the precession of the equinox, technically the ages are 26,000 years, I think, something along those lines. And it's when the wobble, like the axis of the earth is wobbling all the time, right? Like in case y'all didn't know that. Astrologically and astronomically, the axis of the world is pointing towards a certain zodiac sign at a certain time.
And it goes backwards. So like usually it goes Aries, Taurus, Gemini, but in this situation, it's actually like going backwards. So it's like Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn. Because we were in Pisces.
We were in
which
Pisces.
was like Jesus,
and
the fish.
war, and kind of very like tumultuous times. Obviously, 26,000 years is beyond what historians say is the recorded thing of human culture, because the agricultural revolutions of all this stuff was like only like 14,000 years ago, or maybe like 10,000 years ago. I don't know for sure, but like, you know, the Egyptian dynasties are only like 12,000 years ago. So it's like, or 12,000 BC. So 14,000 years ago. But you know what I'm saying? So it's like, are we actually in the age of Aquarius now versus whatever? It looks like we are. It looks like, you know, you can say all sorts of stuff like astronomically versus astrologically. And it's kind of hard to say what's actually going on. But
This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius.
But that song is, to me, the quintessential New Age song, because it talks about the age.
Harmony and understanding.
Yeah, it talks about astrological stuff. So it talks about the age of Aquarius, but then it goes into Let the Sun Shine In.
I love that.
Okay, and so Let the Sun Shine In is the indicative of the fact that the New Age movement moved everything that was all the mystery schools, all the esoteric language, all the esoteric teachings, and brought them into the light. And let the sun shine in, right? And so they were like breaking ground. Like it's like these you know, occult stuff that no one knew anything about. I mean, like spiritualism kind of brought it out. Like, you know, Steiner brought stuff out. There was like a whole bunch of people who had brought stuff out over the last, but it was like kind of a club. And it was like, if you weren't a part of the club, you didn't know. Right. But now it was like, okay, we're going to be writing a book, like Timothy Leary writing books about psychedelics. And doing the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and like all these things that were happening. It was just like this total burst of the cultural revolution, but it was a spiritual revolution as well, because you're like, oh my God, there's so many possibilities, and I can go on guided journeys and I can channel. Like I remember Carol, the woman I used to live with, she told me about the first time she ever channeled, and she was saying that she like went to some sort of revival. It was like some sort of
church revival?
I think it was like more of a spiritual New Age revival. Like I think it was like where everyone was getting read like psychically. And she said that she was there, and she kind of got the sense that there was something there. And then she was driving home, and she was in the passenger seat. She looks over at the driver and she says, I think there are two very large beings in the back seat of this car. Like, cause she could just suddenly sense them. Mm-hmm. Right. And then she was able to channel them from then on. But, you know, like it was like this total awakening time of like, not only was it about let the sun shine in on the esoteric stuff, but it was also about love and how love was so, so important. Right. And then fast forward to like the transition period between the new and the now age, and you get The Secret, right? So The Secret came out, in the late 90s, I think. Maybe the book was a little bit earlier. You kind of get this interesting mix, like the beginnings of the now age is like, let's mix science. So let's mix quantum physics and things like that with this understanding of what we're doing now.
2006 was The Secret.
Oh, wow. So yeah. So it was like well into the transition period. So those are some of the positive things that the New Age did, right? It like really did herald in this whole idea of...
It was a catalyst for a lot of change, right?
And it was massive to the people who went through it at the time. Mm-hmm. Like it was just so big. Like we wouldn't have Hay House if it wasn't for...
Hay House is the self-help publishing company.
Is the self-help publishing company, exactly. But one of the criticisms is that
the toxic positivity.
Is the toxic positivity, right? There's actually two things I want to talk about. One is about toxic positivity. The other is about like high vibes and how I'm like always having the highest vibe, which is something the Now Age says too. But and then the third thing, so actually three things, is spiritual bypass, is bypassing.
Right.
Right. Okay. So actually toxic positivity is the idea that you are faking it until you make it. So we actually talked about this with the New Kadampa tradition, mm-hmm. and how they encouraged you to do spiritual bypass, which is this idea that like, I'm just going to pretend that I'm happy and then I'll be happy.
And it's such a lie, because the whole point, I think, of being present is to recognize where you are. So if the analogy I like to think of with the toxic positivity is that if I'm like traveling from California to Georgia, I'm going to have to go through, you know, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama. And if I'm driving there and I'm in Texas and I'm acting like I'm in Georgia already or pretending that I'm in Alabama, it's ridiculous. Like, you are where you are. So there's steps to get to where you're going, and like to think like, I'm going to behave like Buddha. I'm going to act and talk like Marianne Williamson. I'm going to act and talk like Eckhart Tolle. That's like acting like you're in Georgia when you're still in Texas or New Mexico. Like, honor the practice, honor the process, honor where you are. Like, be real and honest about where you are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the toxic part of the toxic positivity is particularly about to the detriment of others. So if you have a tendency to do it to other people, you're going to feel fine. You feel totally fine. Oh, you'll get over it. Oh, you'll do like these kind of like dismissive ideas
Don't
of like,
cry, or don't
just
cry.
just think to the highest.
Think
Only look at
positive.
the good things. That is the real criticism of toxic positivity.
Yeah, I know somebody who does that a lot. It's like, let's not address any quote negative emotions and only focus on the positive and only speak positively and only speak affirmatively.
Right.
And I think that can actually be toxic.
Yeah. And so what that does is it encourages bypass. And I actually am going to do I think I might do an entire future episode on bypass, but there was this really great article by a guy, which I will link in the show notes. And it talks about, I think he has like 10 different types of bypass. He has positivity bypass, which is AKA bliss bypass, the tendency to feign positivity, bliss, in an effort to sidestep or rise above the unhealed shadow, often associated with the ungrounded, it's all good mantra.
What was this? But before we get into that, what was the second thing? So you said toxic positivity, something else, and then spiritual bypass. What was the second thing?
The second one was about saying I resonate at a higher vibe, right?
Can you explain that?
Yeah, I'll get into that in a second.
Oh,
I was
okay.
just going to go straight into spiritual
Sorry,
bypass.
sorry.
That's okay. I was going to come back to it.
Okay.
But
No,
I did it
I
out of
just
order.
don't want to miss it.
So with spiritual bypass, the entire idea is that, like, in theory, emotions sit, like, if you want to look at it in a chakra system, right? So like your kundalini sits at the bottom of your spine, and it's like a piece of energy or whatever, or in yoga, it's like you have this kind of energy, and the energy needs to rise up through your body till it reaches the heavens, if you want to think about that, right? And so when you're in yoga, my yoga teacher in particular, Acharya Swami Jayadevi, she talked about how first you go through this kind of experience of survival with the emotion, and then you have to go through the abandonment. You have to go through all the different experiences in the body, and then you have to go through this experience of moving from the power center, which is in your third chakra, up to your heart. People who do spiritual bypass go straight from the third chakra in the solar plexus to the voice, and they don't have to put it through their heart. Right? Because in the heart is where sits the divine feminine. It's where you feel it. It's where you have to go through dark practices. Like, the heart is a transformational zone within our bodies. And if we choose to bypass our heart and feeling the emotion and just like, or feeling the knowledge or feeling whatever it is that comes to us, like if we just choose to bypass our heart, then we are not surrendering to a higher power. We are not surrendering to ourselves. We're skipping the step of surrender, which means that what's coming out of our mouths is just a load of bullcrap. Like, it's just a whole bunch of whatever, because we're just going straight from wanting power to using our voice to get power, as opposed to doing it through love, through the heart chakra.
I think that is more likely to happen to people who really intellectualize their emotions. Mm-hmm. That's like the people who are like in their quote unquote in their head. They're more likely to do that, wouldn't you think?
I would think so. Yeah. And yeah, for sure. And so that's particularly in the case of, there are a couple of teachers, you could say, who do spiritual bypass, how they just talk because they want to get power and they know how to get power that way. But for people who are doing toxic positivity, they're really not encouraging you to do the dark practices. And I'm going to do a future episode on the dark practices, but the dark practices are not evil practices. They're not black magic. They're not any of that kind of stuff.
Shadow work?
It's shadow work.
Okay.
It's shadow work. I have some stuff. I got some stuff that's really affecting the way that I behave. It's really doing all this. And I'm going to deal with it because I need to process that emotion. I want to unstick that emotion. I want to
love all parts of me.
I want to love all parts of me. Exactly. So
not just the happy ones.
Exactly. So, and then the last thing that I want to talk about with the New Age, which is a criticism of the New Age, is like this whole idea of like, I'm on a higher vibe than you. I am so guilty of doing this. I totally do it.
What? I'm more spiritual than you are, and therefore I'm better, kind of thing.
It has to do with frequency. Like, it has to do with the frequency of like saying I'm well, I'm just on a different level than you. I'm on a different level of spiritual development.
Dismissing others because you think you're better than them.
It's spiritual supremacy.
Okay,
It comes across as spiritual narcissism. I think that the Now Age Jews does a lot more spiritual narcissism, but it's like a spiritual supremacy that says that, I don't have to do this because I'm above it. I can't get sick because I'm above it.
All right. I don't have to wear a mask because I'm not afraid of this virus.
Exactly. So it's like this whole idea that like I vibrate on a certain level. That may be true. That may be totally true. And you may have something figured out, but at the same time, you also live in a community of people. Right. So it's kind of important to like recognize that I don't even say higher anymore. I just say faster, because there is something to be said with the fact that we are some things in some aspects of our lives we deal with are faster or slower, and that denser things like denser experiences are slower, because that's just like a kind of metaphysical explanation of it.
Right. I did Matt Kahn's course, The 10 Spiritual Laws of Success, and I love what he says he calls them slower emotions and faster emotions. So he's like, grief, depression, anger, they're not lower. They're just slower. Yeah. Like they make you pause and stop and really integrate and listen. And they're not lower. And I like that. So it's no longer a ranking system of like, I need to not feel sad. I need to not feel bad. Like feel those things. They're just slowing you down. And not in the sense of like, there's a race and you're slow, but like they're making you slow down and reflect. And that's actually beautiful.
Yep. No, I completely agree. I really like that explanation.
Yeah. I love that guy.
So going from there and going into the Now Age, I want to use the example of manifestation to kind of show how this changes, right? So The Secret came out in 2006, like you said. So it's definitely tail end New Age, right? But it became extremely popular extremely quickly, right? Because you already had a set of an audience of the New Age who were going to be like...
the author manifested the success.
I mean, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I read the book The Secret and I saw the movie, and actually... it was a copycat of a book, lesser known book. I believe it was a copycat of a lesser known book called Creative Visualization by Shakti Gaiwan that came out in the 70s. And I read that in the 80s or 90s, and it was wonderful. It was all about just like how you visualize what you want, make a vision board and manifest things. So The Secret is very similar. I don't remember exactly the details of The Secret because I remember thinking, this is just creative visualization. But the idea was just that there is a law of attraction out there. And if you focus on what you want and give it quote unquote positive energy, meaning like not giving it longing or wanting energy, which just generates more longing and wanting, but give it an energy of like, it's here and it's now and I'm owning it, then you will manifest it and draw it towards you, because the universe is just a big copy machine. It'll just give you whatever energy you're putting out, it'll give it right back.
Right.
And then there was a lot of spin-offs off of that. Like there's books called The Secret Behind the Secret, where they help you understand that you have subconscious blocks. Maybe you don't believe you deserve it. Like you're doing all this manifestation work and it's not working. Well, why? Maybe because you have a block. Maybe you think you don't deserve it. Maybe you think that there's some secondary gain to not having the thing you want. So beyond The Secret were other books, which I thought in some ways were better because they kind of forced you to look at your blocks to receiving the things that you wanted.
Right.
But anyways,
that to me is more indicative of the Now Age.
Yeah.
Right. Because I feel like a good indicator of the New Age with manifestation is visualize it, don't want it, and you're good. Like, let's just look at the positive. You're going towards, to use our NLP language, you're going towards what you want, right? As opposed to what do you have to leave behind in order to get there? And I think that is, to give you another example, there's a website called To Be Magnetic, and there's a teacher called Lacey Phillips, and she is a recent manifestation teacher, and she talks about in so much detail, like she uses hypnosis and theta waves in visualizations to be able to unblock all your stuff. She reparents you. She does all this other stuff. Like she goes into so much detail using, this is Lacey Phillips. I think you know, she's in To Be Magnetic.
Heard of her.
Yeah. She goes into so much detail in order to not only give you a very clear method for manifesting the future, which is, you need an expander. You need somebody who has the thing you want that you're going to be able to like see, that you're using as your expander, but you also have to create windows that are open that can allow you the thing to come in. Like you can't just like, you know, it's like wanting to win the lottery without buying a lottery ticket. Like you have to create windows to do it. but then also like reparenting all your stuff, like getting rid of all your doing all your shadow work so that you can manifest more fully because you recognize that you actually want something. Or like, and she says as a great example, like the tests that come at you are like examples of like, oh, well, you're going to be content with 90% of what you want. That's not okay. It's not okay to be content with just 90% of what you want because you don't think you're worth it. Okay, so now we have to go back and figure, why don't you think you're worth 100% of what you want? Mm-hmm. Right. And so I feel like that's the hallmark.
Did you do her course?
I did. I did. I think that is I did her course. For about 6 months. I did a lot of the different things. And so what I think the Now Age talks about in particular is this whole idea that it's like, I feel bad and that's okay. My negative emotions are just as valid as my positive emotions. If I have negative emotions, let's figure out why, right? It's all about shadow work. It's all about
love
like,
and accept them and not like run from them.
Right, exactly. And so, it's a lot about self-love. And I think that that's the part of the Now Age that I say, okay, I'm a practitioner of the Now Age, is because it's all about self-love. It's not necessarily about loving others. That's definitely in there, right? Like the age of love that all happened in the 60s and the summer of love and stuff like that. It's not necessarily about loving others. It's more about how do I love myself more fully? Like how do I actually become in myself and deal with all the other stuff and actually be able to do that? So a great example of this is Robbie, our teacher. There was this one place that I went to that was really, really terrible. It was negative. It was like a hellhole, basically. And Robbie, I didn't...
To just clarify, Chris went to basically a haunted property and with her psychic abilities was able to perceive a direct portal hole to hell, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't know how to deal with it. So I brought Robbie in to help. And she cleared the property. And it was really interesting because she said that in her process, she normally would go in covered in light, like psychically go in covered in light because the light would like burn everything up that came near her. Mm-hmm. And what she recognized was that in order to go into this situation, she couldn't do that. She had to go in completely unprotected, quote unquote, unprotected, because the only way that she could do it was because like the light would attract everything like a moth to a flame, right? So the way that she needed to go in was surreptitiously and just like, I'm just going to be here. I'm just going to be me and I am safe. I have enough ability to deal with whatever comes at me, good or bad. And I don't have to have this massive protective light around me trying to burn everything off because that's actually going to put me in more danger than it would otherwise. Mm-hmm. And so that to me is like indicative of like the New Age is like surround yourself in light. And the Now Age is like,
right,
I'm me, dark patches and all.
Yeah.
Right. And so, one of the things that I love about like some of the parallels that we're seeing is that I think that the Now Age in summary is about pragmatism. I think there are some cons. I think that there is a lot of people kind of jumping onto the bandwagon and it's a lot about manifestation and kind of consumerism and like how do you appear. And I think that there are a lot of people who are in the Now Age who are like in this new wave of spiritualism or spirituality who aren't, no, I'm not going to judge them. They're doing what they're doing.
You mean the people who are using, quote unquote, using spirituality and shadow work just for manifestation purposes? Is that New Age or Now Age?
No, they're using it just to get followers. Like that's what I'm more talking about is that like the combination of technology and social media
it's like
and
a social
spirituality.
Media thing.
It's a social media thing. It's like, how do you do this? Some people are completely genuine. And I think that it's easy to tell. And some people just aren't like, I don't know. I guess for me, it's funny. You're indicative of like your indication that someone is like well realized is that they don't fidget. Mm-hmm. And mine is that they don't preen themselves. They don't like groom themselves on camera all the time. It's really, really hard not to do that. But that's just my prejudice. There's an amazing book. What we're seeing is that there's an intersectionality. And for those of y'all who don't know that term, it's a social justice term, but it's this idea that like people who are women and Black will have a tendency to have more against them than people. Like there's an intersectionality of like being a woman, which is like not equal to men most of the time, and being a person of color that then creates an intersectionality, which makes it then that you have it even worse. Like it's basically like almost a summation effect. That's not the best explanation of intersectionality. What I love right now is that, like, especially in Atlanta, like the Black community coming together with spirituality is just like, it's so, they're just like leading the way in so many different ways. And that's like one of the things about the Now Age is that it is about intersectionality in the sense that like the different cultures that exist that are doing the spirituality may have different takes on it. There's a really great book called Stay Woke, which talks about like Blackness and what talks about that in relation to meditation and all these different meditation practices. So it's like, I think there's some really interesting stuff that's coming up in the Now Age, and it's all wrapped up in this kind of cultural revolution that I think that we're in the middle of and we won't even recognize until later, though in some ways it is obvious, because the Now Age is all about being pragmatic. It's all about being like, how do I use my spirituality in the world to get where I need to go, to get what I want, or just to be myself, right? Or to quiet my mind, or to do all the things that like to get rid of the distractions. What I was going to say is that one of the really great things in the last, as we close up here, is that psychedelics, so fascinating. Psychedelics first came out, like LSD and stuff first came out back in the 70s. And now microdosing of both psilocybin mushrooms and LSD, as well as the use of psychedelics to do like major psychiatric and psychological transformations in people.
Microdosing is big.
Yeah, is all coming up. And plus you're having edibles that are available. Like there's just so many parallels between the two times. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a quote by Ruby Warrington, who actually runs a podcast called The Now Age, I think, or something along those lines. She says, on a spiritual level, I think that technological advances of the Now Age are literally showing and reminding us that we are all connected, something that the most ancient spiritual texts all talk about, when they reference the life force energy that flows through and connects all living things. Hopefully, operating from this place of connectedness will make us all more conscious of our choices, thoughts, words, and actions. So she's pointing out there that the Now Age is about connectedness more than anything, which obviously parallels the technological state that we're in.
So I wanted to end with a quote, and I can't remember who said it, and I can't find it verbatim, but it says something like, in regards to LSD or microdosing, it says, drugs allow you to look into the window of God's home, but meditation brings you to the door and lets you come and eat at God's table. And I thought that that's like a really...
That's awesome.
Great example of like, yeah, you can take shortcuts, but ultimately,
yeah,
the deep self-reflection is going to take you to the ultimate.
So I actually had a trip once that showed that very thing, which is why I really loved the quote. I had this vision of like heaven was like above and like the ground was below. And there were all these people who were trying to get to heaven and the experience of heaven. And there was one person who had piled up books and was trying to climb up the books to get to heaven, but they were still like really far away and they couldn't reach it because no matter how much they tried, they were still just in their mind. And then there were others who were taking drugs. And what they were doing was they were doing this really weird, like flippy thing. It was like they were on the ground, then they were in heaven, then they were on ground, then they were in heaven. It was like you were just oscillating at this place. You were like portaling between them, but you weren't actually staying in either place for very long. And then the last one was like the person was just meditating and like doing the work themselves, and they weren't just like trying to bypass it.
Steady staircase up.
And and they were just like they were in both places at the same time. They were so big that they were in both places at the same time.
How cool is that?
It was a cool trip. Yeah. So
well, thank you for this.
Yeah. Just in summary, this is more just an informational session, but you know, it's one of those things that say like, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. This stuff evolves, and the new age is not necessarily like, if you don't like parts of stuff, just don't do that part and find how it's evolved over time. And, you know, we have a tendency to just say there is a lot going on right now with people saying that the new age is very big on picking up conspiracy theories along with like the QAnon type people. And I find that that's like, for me, it's disturbing to hear that because I think that that's like a very blank generalization about people who are new age. But I also think that there's a lot in the new age that feels very conspiracy theorist, you know, like when you get into aliens and when you get into kind of like all these really far off things of like channeling a being from another, you know, planet. QAnon, if anything, is just holding up something that the new age has done forever. If you want to know what I'm like, if you know what I'm saying. And so like, I just think that you shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. believe what you want to believe until you don't believe it anymore, and just like allow yourself to evolve.
Thank you for listening to this episode of This Spiritual Fix. If you have any comments or questions about this episode, or any questions that you want for us to answer, please be sure to email us at this.spiritual.fix@gmail.com.
Follow us on Instagram.
This.spiritual.fix. Be sure to like and subscribe on Apple or wherever you get your podcast too. It helps people find us. And remember,
Humility, gratitude, acceptance, done.
Hi, Kristina, co-host of This Spiritual Fix. Has listening to our podcast stirred up something for you with the primal wounds? The good news is you have access, and that is the first step to transforming these wounds. We created support packages to help you through this process, and they're available on our website, www.thisspiritualfix.com. These packages were designed by Anna and I, combining techniques and hacks from our own experience working through our own wounds. Each packet contains a workbook and 2 meditations, one about forgiving those who have wounded you, including yourself, and one about reprogramming old beliefs. You can buy an individual support package, or for those next level processors, all 5 packets: abandonment, injustice, rejection, betrayal, and humiliation. Available on our website and our shop.